vice chairman of this board. Fortunately, Stuart couldn't be here today. A couple of months ago, he called me and asked me to serve as vice chairman. I reluctantly agreed, and then Don informed me that he wasn't gonna be here. Asked me to take over, so. Sheila, would you please call the roll for us?
Do we have Amy Jordan on?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Bartville Bill. Bill Hightower. Governor Brian Kemp. Candace Rose. Dr. Kiana Good.
Present.
Krista Bison. Chris Wells.
Present.
Thank you. Del Keith.
Present.
Emily Davidson.
Present.
Thank you. Frank again. Chunk Newman.
Present.
Greg Dozier. Thank you. Keith Clark.
She wanted to decide.
James Wilburn.
Present.
Thank you. Jay Cunningham. Keith Brady.
Here.
Kelly Brownlow. Thank you. Ken Warnock. Lisa Winton.
Here.
Thank you. Lindsay Hill.
Here.
Thank you. Logan Leslie. Margaret Conrad.
Here.
Thank you. Mary Fort.
Present.
Thank you. Mike Long.
Here.
Thank you. Buddy Harden.
Here.
Thank you. Trish Ross.
Here.
Randy Beal. Trey Taylor.
Here.
Thank you. Sam Dasher. Sam McCurchin.
Here.
Thank you. Stuart Countess.
Working with Dr. Alexander. Remember, you told me to find out about the budget and what we had to do. She said the first thing she needed.
Susan Andrews.
Here.
Thank you. Teresa Fisher.
Here.
Thank you. Gonna go back through. Fargo Beal. Bill Hightower. Governor Brian Kemp. Keith Clark. Logan Leslie. Randy Beal. And Stuart Countess.
We do have a form. Thank you, Ned. A couple of announcements. First, we have had some staff changes. Jasmine Robertson has joined the compliance team as the compliance apprenticeship team as new apprenticeship pathways coordinator. Kenneth Kip Slade has accepted a new position and is no longer with the Office of Workforce Division. We're currently working to fill that position. We've got a couple of new board members. I'd like to introduce Mindy Hill, Senior Vice President of Human Resources at Georgia Power. Welcome. And then Amy Jordan, Chief Nursing Officer at Advent Health Redmond, appointed September the 6th. Welcome, new board members. I believe everyone got a copy of the agenda and meeting minutes from our August 15th meeting. Any questions on either of those? If not, I'd entertain a motion to accept those.
Motion.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. All right, committee reports. First I'm calling on Dr. Andrews, for the youth committee.
Youth committee met on. Youth committee met on October the 15th. We unfortunately didn't have a quorum that day. However, we had no policy action items to consider. We did hear an excellent highlight from Career Rise. We heard from Sherry Blight and Nate Betrayal with Career Rise, Career Compass Academy. The Career Compass Academy was a respondent to the COVID-19 pandemic to allow youth to receive virtual work experience opportunities. The program allows WIOA eligible youth ages 16 to 24 to enroll in a 5-week virtual career exploration and work readiness program. The program consists of 15 live webinars with panels of industry professionals and 41 self-paced modules from Accenture's Skills to Succeed Academy in 5 high-demand industries. Those industries are skilled trades, manufacturing, healthcare, information technology, and transportation distribution and logistics. The Career Compass Academy partners closely with the local workforce areas. CareerWise provides local area youth staff with training on how to use the platform and other technical issues. In the near future, CareerWise plans to release a pilot called Career Compass Academy on Demand. And this pilot offers more flexibility for participants by providing year-long enrollment and different options, including a fully remote option, a classroom-style option, or a hybrid model. We also heard from Jennifer Houston, our Youth Services Lead, who discussed the status of the 2024 Youth Roundtable discussion, which is a series of training sessions on youth-related topics for WIOA directors, youth staff, and providers. The first session will be over the 4th at Georgia. That concludes the Youth Committee report, Mr. Chairman. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to refer them to the staff.
Any questions?
Is there any sort of metrics for the success of this kind of wild speed, like concept of remote on some of those areas? So what are the measurements of success for the program?
The program, so these are actual registered participants. So they'll be measured by the same performance metrics that all others are. So we'll have those figures report out on those specifically from speed competition. I believe Stephen's doing the overall update, so they would fall into the population what it says in I want to see the whole for them right now.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, next I'll ask Teresa Fisher for a report on adult dislocated worker committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. The Adult Dislocated Worker Committee met on October 9th. The quorum was met, and the meeting's agenda and previous meeting minutes were both unanimously approved by the committee. There were no further action items for the committee to consider. We had Tammy Kerfoy and Maisha Smith of WorkSource Atlanta. They gave us an overview of their success serving the homeless individuals through the Quest Dislocated Worker Grant. And for this grant, WorkSource Atlanta has partnered with shelters and humanitarian organizations such as the Gateway Center to provide workshops on job readiness, financial literacy, resume building, and more to individuals facing homelessness. Additionally, through their partnership with the STEM Institute, WorkSource Atlanta has been able to successfully train and employ over 20 individuals. We heard from Diane Allen, OWD's Regional Operations Manager for the Metro Atlanta region. She gave an overview of the recent Veterans Job Fair hosted at the Gwinnett Career Center. On October 1st, more than 30 employers and 250 job seekers attended the fair, which hosted employers like Delta Airlines, Fifth Third Bank, and veteran-specific community organizations. Bianca Dixon, OWD's business specialist, gave us a preview of the upcoming WorkSource Georgia Academy, which will take place in Jekyll Island on December 2nd and 3rd. The conference is for workforce development professionals and service providers and will focus on modernizing the workforce system for the future. John Lyle Moore, our OWD Business Service Specialist, gave an overview of recently released guidance on employer pre-award reviews. A pre-award review is a process that is conducted by the LWDAs prior to the beginning of a training program to ensure the employer meets the requirements for WIOA. The workforce guidance letter expands allowable documentation, eliminates burdensome administrative requirements, and adopts clear language for employers and frontline work staff. And that concludes our report.
Thank you, Teresa. Any questions? Mike?
Teresa, you had Maddie, refer you. Do you know what the average age was for the veteran dedicated? I don't know to find that out, but I'll see what type of class they're coming from.
Any other questions? All right, is Dr. Wilburn on the line with us, or do you have someone to give us an update on the finance and performance?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, everybody. The Finance and Performance Committee met October 15th at 1:15 p.m. We did meet quorum. However, there were no action items to discuss. We did have Director James Thomas present on the eligible training provider list removal and appeals process. Now, most of you know that the application to the education training provider list starts at the local workforce development board level. Program is submitted by an education training provider to the local board. The board will then review the program, assess whether it is approved, and then forward that program to the Office of Workforce Development for placement on the state ETPL. The application only needs to be submitted to one of the local workforce development areas to be added on to the state's ETPL. If a training provider has multiple programs, each program has to go through the application and approval process. So there's not multiple programs listed under one application form. Now, this is different for apprenticeships. Apprenticeships do not go through this program or this process. Because they are Department of Labor, and there's a different process for apprenticeship programs. This is just the training programs, the education training programs. Now, in terms of the removal process, some programs can be removed from the ETPL. Again, this process is initiated at the local workforce development level. Some reasons that a program may be removed or inaccurate information being provided to the local workforce or the state on its performance, substantial violations in terms of complaints from students, licensure, program inactivity. These are just some examples. Once a program is removed, it stays off the ETPL for 2 years, at which point the education training provider can reapply for that program to be added. If there's a disagreement on whether the program was removed justly at the local level, then that will elevate up to this committee, the Finance and Performance Committee, through the appeals process. And so at that point, then we would adjudicate the program, whether it continues on the ETPL or not. So that's what we talked about on our meeting on Tuesday. We also talked about the state of Georgia's economy. However, I believe that is going to be discussed here in the larger meeting, so I will defer to that presentation later on. If there are no questions, I turn this back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? All right, thank you, Dr. Wilburn. Next, we're going to get an update on the apprenticeship committee, Chris Device.
The apprenticeship committee met on Monday, October 7th. We did meet quorum. There was no action items for us to review. We did get an update from Brandon Ona, the Director of Apprenticeships and Business Services, about the Apprentice Georgia program development and the grant activities. For year 24, we saw a total of 318 apprentices sponsored by colleges, with a total of 578 current active apprentices sponsored by TCSG colleges. There are 29 active engaged employers with 14 program documents submitted to the US DOL offices of apprentices for approval. Georgia Department of Education recently received a U.S. Department of Labor apprenticeship grant to upskill paraprofessionals to classroom teaching positions through registered apprenticeships. And the Apprentice Georgia team is working to help support our efforts with this grant in the hopes to align recent state investments in public sector apprenticeships to the apprenticeships created through this grant. OWD recently announced that the Apprenticeship Navigator Grant, which is $150,000, is funded through the USDOL's State Apprenticeship Expansion Formula Grant and will fund apprenticeship activities in 3 LWDAs that are selected. The purpose of this grant is to increase WIOA eligible participants connected to apprenticeship programs and the LWDA capacity to serve businesses through apprenticeships. We also got an update from John Lyle Moore, with Business Services Specialist, about the Workforce Implementation Guide. And then Tyrese Eccles let us know from his position at the Apprenticeship Partnerships and Outreach Coordinator about the upcoming 2024 Georgia Apprenticeship Summit. The summit will be held at Forsyth Conference Center in Lanier Technical College, Cumming, Georgia, on November 20th. And they are opening it up for invitation to all state board members if they would like to attend. This concludes my report.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions?
Got a question. In the apprenticeship committee, several meetings ago, we were talking about the issue that not many of the schools were involved in the apprenticeship laws. Have we gotten any further, commissioners involved in that as far as involving more of our schools in the apprenticeship thing? Because several of them, as far as the students, they were coming out of a few instead of the mass.
I can speak to that. So yes, there's a handful of schools that, public ones colleges, there's a wide variety of range of apprentices. Some of them hundreds of apprentices, from 0 to in student. For those that are on the lower end, a couple of things that we have since implemented or in the process. One, with the addition of Tyrese Eccles partnerships, having in-person trainings at each of the schools. So one more recent one was that one where historically there hasn't been as much apprenticeship activity. So we hope that is one way to help build capacity on the ground. On the second side of it are contributing to MLG division colleges to help fund and support the administrative requirements that it takes for them to be. We hope with that, well, particularly those things.
It'd be nice to see it spread out on the school, instead of just being lumped into a couple of, getting most of your activity out of few of the schools instead of 16 or whatever.
And we're also trying to figure out ways to highlight some of the best practices for more successful programs that we're seeing and see how that can be done.
You guys do a fabulous job. I mean, I'm on the committee, but it's just, it would be interesting to watch it. Thank you.
Lisa?
So, I recently, looking at the apprenticeship program for my company, have met one of the technical colleges and looking over basically the curriculum and the program. It would be great for me to be able to talk to other manufacturers that have been successful in doing the same type of programs that are not really large companies, that are smaller companies. Maybe some sort of program where we're inviting those small manufacturers to the table to really talk in more depth of these apprenticeships. And I might have missed, there might already be that in the works, so I apologize.
That was a great idea, and we'll take that back. Yes, especially in the area that there's a lot of through here, a lot of quality factors that present second. Definition of that.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Oh, yes, one additional thing, so the summit that was mentioned, sorry, Mr. Chairman, that was mentioned a few moments ago, that will be held in Georgia. And then at that particular summit, we will be highlighting a variety of apprenticeship program across various industries. And so you hope to have a lot more employers at that event, as well as our economic development community. But again, that would be more of a wide recognition.
When was that?
November 20th. And I'll make sure I would send out the registration.
Any other questions? Okay, under the executive committee, I believe you've got proposed dates for next year's meetings. I could entertain a motion to approve those dates.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And then we have several presentations. First, high demand, high priority list. Ian Caraway, Irene Mine, and Jackie Lundberg will give us a presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us, and thank you for your service on this important board. And I also want to thank Commissioner Dozier and his team. They are an integral part of what the governor's hoping to achieve over the next 2 years. And as we always say, TCSG is a well-oiled machine. And that is because of the staff back there and Commissioner Dozier. We appreciate them so much. I'll introduce my co-pilots today. I've got Irene Munn, who is on contract with us, helping us with the work.
Ian, can you turn the mic on?
How about that? Okay. Nikki Edwards, who's with the Office of Planning and Budget, and Jackie Lunsford, who is with the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. And I know you all heard a little bit at your last meeting, maybe, about the high demand list. But I want to introduce you, if you weren't at the Governor's Workforce Summit a few weeks ago, a month ago, there we go. The Top State for Talent Initiative, which plays off of we are the top state for business. But to go along with that, the governor knows we need to be the top state for talent to attract the jobs, for both the jobs that we have now and the jobs that are coming here and that we hope to attract. And part of why I'm here today is y'all are now part of this, and want to tell you a little bit about how this all fits into the bigger picture and why y'all got pulled into this initiative. The Top State for Talent was announced at the summit, but it really started about 2 years ago with the formation of this important group. And this is the Governor's Education and Workforce Strategy team. There are some folks in the back who participate in those meetings, but it involves 5 agencies. It involves our K-12 partners, Student Finance, who, as y'all know, administers our HOPE and financial aid programs, and of course TCSG and USG. Now they may all these agencies may seem like they naturally fit together, but the level of collaboration that has happened over the last 2 years between these agencies is really, at least in our time in office, been unprecedented, and that's all due to the agency heads like Commissioner Dozier and their staff really buying in to what the governor's trying to do. And the first real achievement of this group was the Georgia Match program, which you may have heard about, which we are all very proud of. Is the largest direct-to-college admissions program, which we think played a little bit of a role in TCSG's enrollment increase for this year, which is very exciting. And so many people here were part of that. So how did we get from that to House Bill 982 and creating this high demand list? Well, it actually was employer driven. We had employers who met with the governor say, there are all of these lists out there of what's high demand. Which is the list? What list do we use? And we have some regional lists. So we got to work and came up with House Bill 982, which empowers y'all, important folks of the day, to approve a statewide list and regional list. And why is this important? And I didn't anticipate this when we passed this very simple little bill, but this is a policy and culture change that we have not had across the board in a long time. And House Bill 982, at least for the next 2 years of the governor's term, is really going to be the policy driver for education, that we are aligned. And by the way, TCSG is ahead of the game on this, so congratulations. But we are aligned with our industry needs across these agencies. And it's tough. Got one agency head that's elected, one that's chosen by a board of regents. So it may look on paper, these people talk all the time. That's not always the case, but they do now. And that takes a lot of work and dedication. But I'm going to keep moving. But I want y'all to see the significant piece of what y'all are about to be part of. And that is driving the governor's policy agenda that we have all the way down, up and down the line. School districts, colleges, our other workforce provider partners will align themselves with as we try to move our state to align our workforce and attract our workforce for the jobs that we need. I'm going to skip a few slides because Jackie's doing all the math today. So this list, when I talk about it being a policy driver, I think it's important, what will it do and what's it not doing? Because a lot of people got really freaked out thinking that the governor and his cavalry were going to ride into their county and shut a bunch of programs down and a bunch of people were going to lose their job. That is not what this list does. Our list, we call it the 3 I's, is to inform, influence, and incentivize good decision making that aligns with the list that you all are going to improve. So you can see there it's to inform folks on priorities, influence their decision making, and incentivize alignment. And on the K-12 side of their accountability system, if a school district aligns with the list y'all approve, they're going to get extra points on their annual rating for making that good decision. That's one example. Down the road in the alignment phase, after y'all do your work and it gets out there, the Hope Career Grant will be influenced by this list. And then there's also part, you'll see in a minute, to be looking to the future. A good example I always use is in the governor's second inaugural address. He kind of laid out a vision of Georgia being the ED capital of the country. Well, that's a very visionary thing, and those jobs may not necessarily be here because we're trying to get there. And so this list also enables that visionary thinking. So the work on this high demand piece of the larger initiative right now, there is a lot of work going on with a lot of people. I think there's probably 40 people really involved with all of this work across the board when you look at all of these different agencies. But things we're looking at, I mentioned the CCRPI is the K-12 rate, quality rating accountability system that I just mentioned. Mike knows all about that if you want to know more. He may have written it, I don't know. Proposed equipment upgrades, they're going to be discussed in the budget season as that kicks up. We hope, again, that influencing piece of updating core standards across the board to align. The accelerated career diploma, which is run out of TCSG, and we are so, I mean, it's really a gem and it's run so well. It's going to align with this list. And some next steps we're working on with the strategy team as we start implementing things, like I said, the Hope Career Grant, A credential registry is a possibility as we try to map out what programs support the list that y'all approve so that people know, okay, if engineering is on the list, well, what are the credentials and the degrees all the way up from TCSG to USG to accomplish getting that credential. So those are some things that we're working on as our interagency team. But I know Karen has talked to y'all a little bit about your role. So I've told y'all why we're doing it. Jackie's going to tell you what all of these people, many of them in the back, have been working on. Y'all are the first group that are not we government folks, that some people call bureaucrats, have had a chance to work on. So we're very excited to show the work of the strategy team to y'all today. And I'm going to ask Jackie to come up, and she's going to talk about the methodology and then what that initial list looks like. I'll go back to Jackie's slide here. Yes, I will go to the map at the end, and then I'll give you this and get out of the way. There you go.
We've got the regional list here. I was not going to kill any more trees. So if you have a region that you specifically represent, you could, yeah, call them out. Atlanta Regional, I'll just call them and then you can, Central Savannah.
Who's Atlanta? Yeah. Who's in the Atlanta area? Metro Atlanta area.
And this is where you would, where how the mapping is done, so.
Anybody else near Metro Atlanta to see? Northeast Georgia? Rivers?
So yeah, it's coastal, so Savannah, this is.
Georgia Mountains, Northwest, up in the Georgia Mountains. Might give it to you, right? You're close to that, the Georgia Mountains. Anybody else? River Valley? Southwest Georgia. Southern Georgia. What about coastal? Right in the coastal area. Northwest Georgia. And then Central Savannah. Central Savannah, anybody? And then Middle Georgia. Aha.
Sorry, just gave me one of them. I said,
They're Clint, you're Clint, so it's forever Clint.
Do I have hard Georgia?
I think that's good.
I'm here on cross.
I think, is it called, is part of Georgia? Yeah, that's Middle Georgia. Right here. Right
Hard
there.
Georgia next to Wayne County. Orange.
Oh, part of Georgia. We don't.
They'll be finished.
I don't think we have part of Georgia.
It's okay.
And so I realized it was about 30 seconds, so I was everybody.
We can't really hear you either.
Okay, let me, is that better? Okay. I'll try to talk loud. I know you guys are gonna be looking at the list, so I did want to, just kind of go through the methodology, really quick. And, before we get started, I will tell you the team that worked on this, worked several hours, just pouring through data, combining it, mapping, doing different, different scenarios. And I want to call on, a couple of people that I know that are in the room, that work in Karen Kirschner's group, and that would be Damon Weller, Steve, Stephen Wilson, and then Josh Geyer. Can I raise your hands? Well, y'all can been around with them. Talk about jumping into deep water and not knowing. none of them kind of look me in the eye right now. We have worked really hard to come up with our first draft. This is gonna be a reality checkpoint, because this is data-driven list. Each of the regions, we took into account the different, dynamics of the regions that truly vary across the state. And so now that we've done the data-driven, now we want a reality check. How does our formula work? So we looked at several sets of data, but we ended up with 4 main categories. For positive projected job growth, the number of annual openings projected over the next 10 years. Wages, we looked at the state median, it's got to be at least 75%. That's because we're promoting high wages, higher wages. And then a credential that's greater, that the requirement for the job is greater than a high school diploma, or it gives moderate on the job training. So there's one category that's public service, public safety, public good. And the reason that we have to have this other category is if you think about law enforcement, they're not going to make, a lot of them are not going to make the wage criteria. They only require a high school diploma because they have their own training program. So that's one of the areas that you'll see if it's public service, public good, they're not going to meet a lot of the requirements. Then that goes into that other category. So after pulling the data, what you're looking at is, if you see the statewide state list, yes, it should be, it's the one that was in your packet. There are 3 main categories, which are architecture and construction, health sciences, which I think we all know, in manufacturing. Those are kind of the top 3. Now each of the regions, your regional list may have something totally different as being top. But this is where there's 2 things that I might ask of you today. Is one, do not pay attention to the category. So this is just one way to categorize it. We use the DOE's CCAE program categories, and it was just a way to put them into a group. We can add TCSG, we can add USG, we can add industry. So don't pay attention to the categories. If you see, a billing clerk that's in business administration, you're like, I think it should be finance. That's fine. That's not, don't pay attention to those. And then do not be afraid or whatever to give me feedback, because I want it. Even if it's rough, I want it, because that's how we're going to make sure the formula works. So those are my 2 asks of you today. I took an example. I took an example of the state high demand list that's in your packet, just to kind of show you how we filter down to get to the number, because I'm sure folks are saying, well, how did you go from 234? So we start out with 782 occupations, and that's in every region and the state. That's how many occupations. And then the first step was utilizing the light cast, which is where the guys in the back really helped out. We came up with SOPs for each category in that standard occupation code. Any job that had a positive projected break point, so it can be anything as long as it's positive. The annual average openings, we actually took each region, whatever the median annual openings for those jobs, that's what we use. So the statewide would be statewide. But then each of the regions, some of them have the median annual openings is 7, where another one could be 234. So we actually compared it to the region median, and then the wage requirement, we were going to do the same type of, and this is just going through the data, you come across these. It ended up that some of the 75% of the wage for that region didn't meet minimum poverty level. So we're obviously not going to promote that. So we went ahead and went with the statewide. Obviously, some of the regional places are not gonna pay as much as Metro. So that's why we went 75% of the statewide median, which then we pulled the MIT, living wage calculator for 2 adults, 1 child. And that's how we compare kind of our thought process. We did talk to several states, and a couple of them have, instead of 75%, they've got it at like 70, and most of them said they wish they went up a little bit to just encourage higher wages. And then I already talked a little bit about it, but the credential required for on-the-job training, what we want to do is make sure that folks are getting the skills that they need. So the job has to require either something past a high school diploma. It could be an industry credential. It could be something, doesn't have to be after high school. It could be something they earned in high school. But it's got to be something that's industry recognized, or they've got to have on-the-job training. So when they get that job, that training will be given, and they'll, hopefully move up, or they'll have skills after that. So so you can see the different filters, and that's how we got to 231, which we'll see on statewide. And then each of the regions will use the exact same filters on the rubric, and that's where you come up with different parties for the regions. Ian, I'm going to turn it over to you, but I am going to ask if anybody has any questions, or just right off the bat you're looking at me like this is real life. This doesn't match what ours is.
So if we have suggestions for this, what's the process?
That's a good question. We are happy to take those. I think we need to, maybe we can get with Karen and
Her team, Karen's a big part of the strategy team, and I wanted to build on a few things Jackie said. When we talk about credentials in this context, that is everything from a micro credential to a bachelor's degree. So don't just think that is how this is done with the jobs you see on this list. It is not just a bachelor's degree or associate's degree. It is after post-secondary credentials and all that encompasses.
I think because you have a wide, that's the purpose of this board, right? Like everybody in this room brings a different set of skill sets from outside in the workforce. So whatever our industry experience is, like we're looking at that, I'm sure everyone's in the same predicament. We're looking at that one section and we're questioning. So just to have that
And
means of feedback.
The legislation does not require the first iteration of this list to be approved until in December. So and that is why we came today, is we want to get y'all's input, thoughts, because y'all are the ones that asked to approve it. I want to go to the rubric.
Sure.
So just to give y'all a little context on the rubric, Alabama's governor's office came and presented to us, and several other states in our region have their own rubric like this. TCSG's been doing all this for a long time, but a lot of other agencies necessarily haven't. And that is, so we're just kind of formalizing a lot of that in a rubric. But the process of getting there, it's a lot of math people.
probably hurt.
Yeah. But are there any initial thoughts or questions?
I just wanted to say, I'm glad you included the SFC code, because that helps, especially with an employer or educator meeting with students, because you can actually understand what that position
That's right.
is.
There's a
That
message in
is-
their bag, but yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent, thank you.
And I was just gonna ask, how was this collaborated or mapped through the data that's published with the Department of Labor, with the Bureau of Labor Statistics?
So we utilize Lighthouse, and Lighthouse uses the Department of Labor, Department of Education Administration, Census Bureau, Bureau of Labor Statistics, all that. So when you pull up, it's got several ways to do it, and I am certainly not the expert, but, we looked at several types of data. The Parker was going straight to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But we did find that LightCap is more consistent, and it's got more, it's got a complete data set. So that way you're not pulling from 50 different things that may not be updated the same way. But that's exactly how this is driven, using the labor statistics, all that.
And what percentage going into the future, obviously like looking at a lot of these jobs, AI is having a huge impact on a lot of these jobs. And I see some of these things where I'm like, if I'm someone going into this right now, 10 years from now, I'm not sure that position can exist anymore. So I'm really gonna wanna.
So they actually take the automation factor into account. And I have noticed that some of them that I didn't realize are showing a negative job growth. So obviously they're not gonna make the list. I will say that I've heard mixed things about AI really doing away with jobs, and it's for retraining folks. So a lot of they just have to kind of take into account, like looking at.
Right. A lot of things to
That's
take
right.
into consideration. You guys did a great job.
And one thing to follow up on your question, one thing the list is not meant to be is static. So one thing that y'all will have to kind of decide is, are we gonna do this every 2 years? Are we gonna do it every 3 years? How often are we going to communicate the changes on the list? Because the careers on the list influence the programs that TCSG, DOE, USG pursue. I did want to say one thing on the public service, public good. That is also meant to be the state government workforce. So there may be things for state government that we really need, like we really need corrections officers. So that could go in that section to address the state government need.
And that was the second question I was going to ask, because when I look at the employments that we provide in the public service, and we had the Senate Bill 3 that passed with just, reducing barriers to state government employment.
Right.
Taking a lot of the jobs down below the bachelor's degree requirements.
Right.
How, if at all, you think that will affect this?
So that's a great question. That is one of the reasons why this is literally every kind of, from micro-credential to bachelor's degree, is all of the things that were in that bill that Joe asked did the assessment on, should not negatively impact anyone. So that's a great question.
No, that actually answered my
Okay.
question is this living, breathing, how often will it be reviewed? So is the original, the subset, regional, are they two? Could there be things on the regional list that are not on the
Yes.
state list?
So let's use an example of
Okay, thank you.
Geechee Tech's up the road. They can, anything on the state list is time in for the state.
Right.
But there may be some specific things, and this may not be the best example, so I'm quoting, but let's say timber. Timber is big over there, but it's not big enough to show up on the state list. So it would be on
Yeah,
the,
and I'm looking at one now, so that's helpful.
yeah, and that, the regional component was a big ask by the Georgia Chamber. And another reason for these wage, you'll see, is we tried, as Jackie said, not to let Metro Atlanta, just destroy everybody else, in the wage category specific.
Could you touch on the benefits of, say, a student choosing one of these careers? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's good. That goes to why are we doing all this work? And the goal there is for folks to be able to get a good paying job in a field where there is possibility for them to sustain themselves and have a career that is in line with what the industry is going to be. And I'll say this, and it's not meant to pick on anybody, but, you know, and not, this is not necessarily TCSG, but you have a lot of legacy education programs out there that may be for industries that are not growing or may not be here in 10 or 15 years. And if we're pushing students to that, we're setting them up to have to go retrain anyway. So let's get it right on the front end and be transparent with people. These are the jobs that are going to grow. Or in that sort of visionary bucket, these are the jobs that the governor of the day or whoever is trying to recruit here. That's what you need to train for.
What about the training into those careers?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think I answered. Oh, were you asking another question?
I was specifically asking about the cost of training to go into those careers.
Yeah. Well, and the great thing is Hope is 100% right now.
I thought that would be the case. But I
Yeah.
didn't brag about it.
Yeah. No. We're very proud.
When you look at a piece of this whole thing that you're talking about, is the training period of time that it takes to get the credential or the whatever to get the wage that you're headed for. One of the things I'm concerned about, I sit on state the licensing piece for sure a lot of this. And I think we should be worried and have a good plan for compressing or shortening the amount of training time, especially for this new generation of people that are coming along. And maybe we
That's
are.
great, Jack. No, that's great because going back to the influence piece of this, it's meant to influence conversations just like that. Because so much of this is employer driven and they're saying we need people trained, but we need people on the line or wherever the work site quicker. This list is meant to drive conversation just like that.
I think that
So I like where
the young people that are coming up are more astute, they're more tuned. They can learn this stuff in less than what we think they can learn it in, right? Sounds a little funny, but at the end of the day, I think it's important that we realize they can compress and learn this stuff in a shorter period of time. And the sooner we get ahead of that curve, more people are gonna be in our state, that work in our state.
And I'll give a shameless plug to TCSG. They have a lot of, we love TCSG. They have a lot of articulation agreements with CTA and DOE to do just that. Sure. And you want to go ahead?
So TCSG, like that, they're going to have to offer the book part of it in classroom until they're old enough to actually do the welding. So they're coming out of high school with a leg up already. But it also, I love this because it's bringing the communication to the table, educators, listening to what workforce needs are. Instead of, you got educators teaching children this, but they don't know, it may not be applicable to the workforce. So this is amazing.
It's not meant to stop the education process. What we're hoping is that it feeds into, we get you in at the entry level, we'll fulfill the workforce needs, but then the education keeps going.
And that's all of what y'all are talking about is why it's so important that this list came to y'all. Because so many of y'all are employers. It's not just, education folks talking to education folks. Y'all represent employers in the industry of the state. And that's how y'all became the best place to be the approver of the list. Is it wasn't just going to be in a vacuum.
I think I had one thing just to add to the conversation, just from the global perspective. This bill really came out because, we were blessed to get some state money for the first time for apprenticeship, something we just talked about. And if we rolled out that program, I think Brandon and the team did an incredible job with it, with the guidance of this board. But it was an apprenticeship focused on high demand. Well, our high demand was really defined kind of solely by our Hope Career Grant, which had been developed quite a time ago when we actually determined what pathways fell into that. So you had discussion on where's fairness? How do you make sure that we're looking across the state from a global and a regional effect for fairness when we roll out incentive programs that our General Assembly and our governor fund? And so part of that is how can we get there? And how can we start having a global look all the way from K-12 through USG to the workforce? And so as we look at that program, we look to have hopefully future incentives, how do we drive that in a way that it's not just statewide, it's regional, but it also helps us as we look at a joint plan, Perkins and WIOA, and really start connecting the dots with everything in workforce across the system. So the real magic of this is we're kind of seeing what it's going to look like. It'll have to work over time, so we got to learn. But it's also trying to set up for a future pathway for everybody to be on the level playing.
Commissioner, that's great. So that way better than I would have. And one other point too is in the past, there's a lot of lobbyists capital. I know y'all don't have to talk to them. They come and talk to the senator, the governor's office, who want to lobby their way for their client to be on the list. Well, if it's a data-driven process, when the industry is all lined up out the senator's office, he can say, hey, go talk to the state worker. No, just kidding.
Come see me.
Just kidding. 2 years, I'm gone. But, they can just say, it's the data. It's the data. So hopefully it will eliminate some of the politics of that have existed of getting on certain lists.
You mentioned educators, talking to educators and articulation agreements a second ago. So mine's going to be from an engineering perspective. Do we have all of those agreements in place where we can get from TCSG to the university system for those careers that have that requirement?
Great question. Yes and no, Sam's answer. We have, if you're in the joint session, I'll actually have a chart up when I do my presentation that shows our number of articulation agreements we have. As you know, we have some global articulation with USG and TCSG, 28 classes globally. We have some 900 agreements at the localized level, meaning between colleges. And so there are pathways. I would love to see some global pathways at the state level. That's something we're still talking about. We haven't gotten there. There's some one-offs. I'll mention in the joint session, we signed with Augusta University a statewide articulation with TCSG on fiber. So if you come to any of the 22 colleges in TCSG and get a 2-year degree in cyber, you can transfer and give full credit for your entire 2-year pathway and start up and finish in 2 years at Augusta University. I would love to see that we have some pathways at the global level, across as many colleges as we could for pathways that make sense. I don't know how doable that is, but I will tell you that you have to architect it a little bit right now to answer your question. We have a great partner. Yeah, we have it is. We have some great ones, like Ogeechee has a great 2-year partnership with Georgia Southern and Engineering. So we have one here locally that maps to the question you're asking. We have a few others at the Southern with Kennesaw that we're growing. So it's just not as clear right now as it could be for student success.
And that is I don't know if you back to the next step, but that is one of the things that's mapping TCSG, USG, GOE's career pathways into this so that you can look at engineering and see.
Yeah, so much of the strategy team's work has been figuring out our common language because one system calls the same thing something else, but nobody. And so, our big kind of what our mantra is alignment. We're trying to align. And the commissioner pointed out a great example of that is for the first time, since I've been around, but a lot of people here have been around longer than me, but the WIOA plan will be combined with the Perkins plan, which is the K-12 rough equivalent of that. And that's coming along very well and has issued these conversations of we don't speak in the same language? Are we talking about the same thing? Are we talking to employers about the same thing? And a lot of those folks in the back have been on those calls.
So sorry, I wasn't gonna get into like detail, but maybe it's kind of, there could be good feedback. So under the manufacturing, it's electrical, electronic, and electromechanical numbers, and of course I'm in. So, we talk about EV, wanting to be the big EV thing, okay? When I go down to engineering, like, I know there's a massive shortage of electrical engineers, but there's also this space in between. Like, I've looked at the apprenticeship program for Megatronics, and I'm looking for somebody who actually could do design and use a AutoCAD package in electrical, but there's really no place for that. And that's kind of critical on the whole EV side, and critical for robots, and critical for all this stuff that we're doing. So there's like this thing in between that we just don't have, or I haven't been able to find.
That's very helpful. So we're gonna take what y'all tell us back to the table to try to answer that or address things. That's very good. Again, this is a draft. We will begin in the next couple of weeks some very light socializing with Georgia Chamber, the Metro Land Chamber, and some people at the very beginning who kind of brought this to our attention. So but if there's anyone, there's a healthcare small group, there's an energy one. If anyone on this call would like to, when we have these, I'm not calling focus groups, it's way too formal, but if there's any information we want about what happens there, we're happy to.
So Lisa, just one off on that question, is there's a way for you to help us, or maybe somebody in the room to match a sock code to the job that you're talking about? And then we can match that to the classes that we have or don't have.
Right.
That would be really good.
And that's really key is you're building the courses that support the list. Those nuances. What course actually support the path.
And it kind of goes back to what Jason about, like, they don't want to necessarily go for 4 years degree.
Hey, check 1 2 2 2. Hey. Check 1 2 1 2. Hey.
Is that my cue?
Yeah.
Checking back.
I think I'm almost out of our time block, but
Such a great conversation, and such a great thing.
well, y'all are the ones that have to vote. But we appreciate y'all we're going to continue having, obviously our internal conversations and talking with those here that have approached us a while ago and have contributed. This hasn't just been done in silo. We've had input along
Very
the way.
much that old school. Hey, check 1 2 2 2.
We've had input along the way, and we've also looked at what other states are doing to try to align and get going. But thank y'all so much. This was great. I've never been to one of your meetings. This is great. So thank y'all for having us and doing this for us. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Obviously, a lot of work's going on in that field. I look forward to seeing success stories come out on the other end. Next, we'll hear from Brandon Ono on rapid response disaster response.
Hey, check 1 2 2 2. Hey.
Yeah, let me go.
Let's start like that.
Yes, yeah, that's my team making sure that you guys can hear me. So before we get into rapid response, I did want to bring your attention to this report right here. And thank you, Commissioner, for bringing this up. This is an annual report of last year's work on our high demand career initiative apprenticeship program that is now called the High Demand Apprenticeship Program with some of the recent legislative changes that the governor's office, the lieutenant governor, and the General Assembly had put forth and signed into law. And so we're really excited about the good work that's come from this. As you'll see over this 2 years, we've hit a lot of our state already with registered apprenticeships, and we hope to increase that, the momentum as time goes on. We also have some really good stories in here of apprentices and companies that have found a solution to some of their pressing workforce challenges through registered apprenticeships. So we're excited about that here. Then of course, there's some great numbers on the economic impact. Looking forward, some new things that will be coming down the pipeline, that actually the TCSG board will be voting on tomorrow, is with these changes, we're going to be, I think we're estimating, we'll be able to double the number of apprentices that we are able to serve through this program. And so we're excited about that. We see this really, even though we're 2 years in as a launching pad. So, switching gears a little bit, I did, I need your help. Thank you. In light of recent events with the natural disasters that we've had, we wanted to take a couple of moments to kind of give an overview of what Workforce Georgia, Office of Workforce Development, what our role is when it comes to natural disasters. Intuitively, when we think of a natural disaster, I actually was talking to somebody a couple of days ago. They were wondering why I was typing all the time, and I said, "Well, we're working on natural disasters, but you work for." No. So one thing that people often don't, agencies, the vast majority of them have a dedicated disaster program of some sort. The lane that we, or the area that we operate in is around workforce recovery. So response and recovery for the workforce. Next slide. And the question you may ask is, why is there a workforce component to disaster recovery? Because natural disasters tend to affect or impact the most lower income individuals who tend to have less skills. And then of course, some of our smaller to medium-sized businesses that may not have the resources they need to recover as quickly and effectively as some of their larger counterparts. And so that's why we spend a lot of time when disaster hits, reaching out to employers and workforce and providing services. And I have a couple of these areas right here. One, engaging and providing information to affected workers and businesses. This is the area that we're trying to build out a little bit more. The past two hurricanes that happened back to back showed our team some areas that we can improve upon. So we'll be focusing more on digital outreach, especially as people may not have internet or may not have electricity, but sometimes people still have access to Facebook, which is interesting. And so we'll be able to try to reach them that way, and then of course leveraging billboards, etc. But with that, helping them understand what great are available, not only for workforce, in terms of finding a job. Last week, there were partners just on every disaster source that a family may need, from identifying shelter to identifying food and water. We also help with the retraining of workers, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Help with disaster relief employment. So when a disaster hits in your community, you may often see people cleaning up or helping provide school supplies to families, etc. In some cases, those are individuals that are actually employed through one of the grants that we administer through our office, the temporary employment for disaster relief. And then lastly, that kind of goes hand in hand with bringing in funds. So oftentimes when a disaster hits, a number of funds are authorized from the federal government. And the way that when it comes to workforce, those funds get to the state of Georgia is through our program in our office, specifically when it comes to workforce. Next slide. Question I always get is, what is a natural disaster? Historically in the state of Georgia, we think of it as two areas, hurricanes and tornadoes. But if COVID had taught us anything, it's actually quite a big list. So upon this program being built out in the Office of Workforce Development a couple of years ago, one of our first projects on disaster recovery was just identifying, okay, what constitutes a disaster, and how do we go about serving businesses and affected workers when said disaster hits. So as you can see here, heat waves, droughts, a terrorist attack as well. There's a wide range of incidents or events that would constitute a disaster. And once one of these events happens and is declared a disaster at the federal level, that authorizes federal funding to then go into to administer to states and local governments. And that is when prior to that, but in real time, we're working with our local counterparts to assess the workforce damage, if you will. Next slide. All right, so who are our partners in this effort? So we have a statewide rapid response team, which we talked about extensively with this group. For those that are new to the board, because we have quite a few people, we have a team of 9 individuals that are scattered out throughout the entire state. And their primary job is to understand the local community, their business community and workforce, and provide services primarily to employers that are closing or laying off. Usually it's not through natural disaster reasons, but when natural disasters do arise, that is a part of their job responsibilities. We also work with our local workforce development areas. Those are the local workforce development boards, similar to you all, that govern federal workforce development funding at the local level. And so whenever those funds are brought in at the state level, we then grant that out to them, and they're the individuals that help fund retraining and the setting up of temporary employment for disaster work sites. And then lastly, we work very closely with our state and local governments, although as you can see, those 2 primary groups are comprised of state and local government. Next slide. So a little bit more of a practical example, because I know I've been talking at a very high level, what happens when a natural disaster hits. So we're going to take Hurricane Debbie, for example. So Hurricane Debbie makes landfall. Brandon is in the middle of cooking dinner, and then he stops, that's me, and starts writing a request, or starts writing the application for a disaster recovery grant, because we were informed to the team that there was actually quite a bit of damage that would lead to job loss, and we were able to find that out pretty early on. So we were able to, so in real time, work with our business and communities to get a sense of, okay, what are your needs? Where are you at? How can we help? And then we take all that information, we put it in an application, and then the moment that federal disaster is declared, we have that information sent right up to the U.S. Department of Labor. They gave us a little kudos because we sent in our application before the rain stopped. So that was pretty exciting on our end, although it did take a couple of weeks for us to get those funds, just in terms of the progress. And so from there, we then take those funds, we grant them out to our local workforce development areas to set up 2 main purposes: retraining individuals and temporary cleanup. But in many cases, those that are involved in temporary cleanup are pushed to retraining if their job doesn't rebound after the disaster. And of course, the end goal is gainful reemployment. A couple of things I'll note about the Hurricane Debbie incident. For those that you that are from this area, probably are well aware. The areas that were hardest to hit were some of our lower income communities, in workers that were largely dependent on lower wage jobs that didn't have the types of flexibilities that one is generally afforded when you're out of a job for a couple of days, right? If the schools close, oftentimes individuals lose their job just by the nature of the way the job operates. And so that's where we see a really big opportunity to take individuals that are affected and get them retrained into some of those higher skill jobs. So if you're looking at this area, for example, you see a lot of development around the industry, number of suppliers. Our hope is that we can retrain these individuals for some of the growing jobs that have higher wages, that can build more resiliency for their families. And then next time a disaster hits, it's a little less. With that, I think that covers what I was going to talk about. Any questions? Yes.
So my question is about the most vulnerable. Just thinking about WIOA Title II, adult education. Is this an opportunity for us to also refer some of those individuals that they lack a high school diploma, or if they, are not English proficient?
Yes, absolutely. And so if we think about all of the success we've had with the Quest grant is this type of funding. So, and I forgot to mention that earlier, when we get this disaster-related funding, it expands our eligibility. Great. So we have a lot more of an aperture on who we can serve. In our number one focus is getting them to the right service, including adult.
So when these workers get retrained and they get a better job, who helps the employer that had the workers once they're back on their feet and have a job?
That's a good question. So it's kind of like it's an ongoing challenge. So I would say to answer that question, if it's, let's say it's a, you know, in our offices, job quality. What are the metrics of job quality? Especially as we're helping employers with, you know, recruitment and training. I think part of it is, you know, yes, we're helping those individuals retrain for higher school jobs, but at the same time, and Levy Watkins here, Jamon Williams is back there. He leads our business services unit on the Title III side. One of their big roles is working with employers, helping them understand the jobs they have and where there are areas that they can improve or have better chances of hiring and retaining individuals. So I don't necessarily think it's you know, this one program alone can help with that, but I think it's a partnership between, you know, our disaster recovery efforts and the, you know, the business services unit.
Any other questions?
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Okay, so next up, we'll hear about the state of Georgia's economy. Joshua Geyer.
Good afternoon. So today I'll be talking about some interesting trends and notes over the past couple of years in our state's economy and workforce. Next slide, please. So starting with labor force participation, we can see that a substantial number of our workers in the Georgia economy are currently not in the workforce. At the moment, it's over 3.3 million. And the unemployment rate, meanwhile, the unemployment rate has been fairly low. Over time, we see that, taking this trend over time, we can see that both the unemployed and the non-participating population ate into the employed population quite a bit, but since then it's been fairly stable. Next slide, please. Unemployment over the same time period has been very low, however, it has ticked up slightly as of recently. It's recently ticked up from its 10-year low of 3.2% in August of 2024. This does reflect a slight cooling in the economy, more of a stabilization. Next slide, please. Taking unemployment by age, we see that overwhelming majority of people, we don't see anything too far out of the ordinary. Most people who are unemployed are at peak working age, 25 to 34 and 35 to 44. Those are the people who are most likely to look for a job if they lose one. Together, these two age groups account for about half of the total unemployment. Next slide, please. Now, looking at the workforce as a whole, at the Finance Committee, I did receive a question about the percentage of state's workforce who are over 65. That number is 5.1% for the state and 6.7% for the country. Now, put that number in perspective, about just under 37% of the state's workforce is under 35. So just about everywhere we look, we're seeing roughly a 5% retirement risk in the next couple of years. Next slide, please. And like I said earlier, since the pandemic, the unemployment rate has been fairly stable since the end of the I end in quotations of the pandemic. We've only seen that number budge by about 0.5%. And let's dig into a little bit about why that is. Next slide, please. One aspect we consistently see is the benefits cliff. This is the point at which one's income rises and to a point where they lose a substantial amount of government benefits and subsidies. Throughout the state of Georgia, that's usually for a single parent of 2 children, that's when their income increases from $32,000 a year to $33,000 a year. Here in Chatham County, the total net expenses, sum of subsidies and income for with total expenses and taxes subtracted, we see an $8,000 drop in net income, right? There at that time, at that stage. Why do you pick on Dodge County? Well, these figures, because benefits are generally tabulated statewide, I had to pick a county and the interface, and so figured I might as well pick on y'all. But this is figures the same across that. It's the same across the state. It's largely accounted for by the loss of SNAP at that income range. Next slide, please. Now, part of the reason the benefit cliff is such a huge deal is that wages, at least in terms of numbers, we'll get into inflation in a second, have been rising substantially. Over the past 3 years, advertised wages have risen by almost 45%. So, $33,000 in 2022. That can, it's very easy to see how someone could quickly, just by their wages rising, even less than inflation, could find themselves outside of the range in which they would receive government benefits. Next slide, please. This next slide looks at inflation-adjusted wages. During the pandemic, in the run-up to the pandemic, we did see a substantial rise, and we did see a substantial rise in real wages. These are 12-month wage increases, and adjusted for inflation. Everything's at $1982. If you're curious. I promise that wasn't me. So, rising. So, here we can also see the exact point at which inflation really started to bite into people's real wages. That's from 2020 to 2022. However, in recent years, past 2 years, we are seeing wages recover, both due to the actual amount people are being paid increasing and also inflation cooling to some extent. So we are seeing a stabilization in that area as well. Next slide, please. But inflation-adjusted wages and labor force participation, these things don't just affect employees; they also affect our state's business community. So comparing the labor force participation and inflation-adjusted wage increases over the past 10 years, you'll notice that these charts almost look like a reverse of each other, with the exception of the inflationary period during the pandemic. Whenever people drop out of the workforce, employers do have to raise their wages to compete for the remaining workers. So there is a cost there as well. Next slide, please. Overall, over the years so far that we know of, we have had 2 hurricanes since August, but in the second quarter of this year, we have seen inflation slow to some extent, as opposed to the rest. But we'll see a little bit as to why. So energy costs as of August have seen some declines, and that's a major driver of lowering inflation. However, housing and transportation costs remain stubbornly high and continue to rise, which is accounting for much of the inflation we're currently seeing. Next slide, please. Now, pivoting to some extent, we can look at the comparison between this chart depicts on the national level the number of people at an education level versus the number of jobs specifying at education level. We see here that a very large number of jobs, a larger number than the number of people at that education level, don't specify any formal education. There is one caveat that some of that is employers simply not posting what their education requirements are. But even at the high school level, we are seeing more jobs only requiring a high school diploma than people who only have a high school diploma. Meanwhile, at some college level, we are seeing this includes, of course, people who flunked out in their first 2 years as well. So it's not, don't worry, this isn't a sign that non-degree credentials are an issue. So we are seeing, so this does show that while there is a bit of mismatch within the workforce between the education levels and what employers are requiring. So that can account for, that may also account for some elements of low labor force participation if people's skills simply don't match what's being required of. Next slide, please. Now, looking at what occupations have grown the most over the past 2 years, we see that statewide transportation has been a massive. Business. That's the occupation slide. Business and financial occupations have seen. Business and financial and transportation have seen pretty massive amounts of growth, both in terms of percentage growth and absolute growth. If you look at this chart, the line is the percentage, the bar and portion is the growth from 2018 to 2023. And business and financial occupations grew by almost 50% this year, so this past 2 years. So it's growing quite substantially. Next slide, please. So, and we see this kind of growth represented in recent job postings. Employers are very aggressively looking for health nurses. Healthcare was also up there. Truck drivers and a variety of other healthcare and transportation related occupations. Next slide, please. And in industry, we see a similar story. Transportation and healthcare are growing very, very quickly. And in the next slide, we'll see that once again, next slide, please. Once again, we'll see that offices of physicians, healthcare and surgical hospitals are posting very aggressively looking for candidates. Interestingly enough, here we see 2 of the top 5 are actually industries dedicated to finding work. So that is a kind of finding employees. So that is kind of an indication of the extent to which employers that are demanding workers are having to increasingly turning to more, and employers are increasingly turning to outside agencies to find help. Next slide, please. And taking a look outside of urban areas, these charts all look at the state of Georgia when you remove all the metropolitan statistical areas. We see that non-urban Georgia is still expected to see population growth, wages are a bit lower, and the labor force participation is a little bit lower than the state at large. However, they are still expected to grow in those aspects. Okay. Slide, please. So, any questions?
Sure, we got some questions.
I had a quick question. This goes back to the benefits cliff. So I know earlier you said that a large portion of that was the loss of SNAP benefits. I didn't see indicated CAPS, which is that child care subsidy, and I wondered, how influential that was in that data.
I don't have an answer for you there, but if you email me, I can get that to you quite easily.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Any more questions? Thank you for that presentation.
Cameron.
Next up, Stephen Wilson will give us a presentation on Georgia's data performance.
Good job.
Good presentation. Good question.
You going out? You owned it?
I'll get us there.
You like fast forward on like 4 times. Are all the slides being sent to us?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I was gonna ask.
Yes.
And I just wanted to apologize in advance. I realize it's after lunch. This will be the third data-heavy presentation. So if y'all need to stand up or boot collar or whatever, just wake yourself up, feel free. This is your time to do so. All right. So I will be discussing our PY23 WIO performance results. And these are final, well, technically, they're not final numbers, but they will be very soon. We were a little bit nervous. We had a little snafu with some of our reporting, but these numbers will be final very soon. To give some of our new board members or any of our more distinguished board members who maybe need a refresher, just here's how. How are we being measured? The feds measure WIO Title I, adult dislocated workers with 5 performance measures. The first is second quarter after participant exits. Do they have employment? Likewise, in the fourth quarter after they exit our programming, have they found employment? And they look at the percentage of those participants who have found employment. Additionally, if they received training or education programming, did they obtain a recognized credential? Also, in the second quarter after exit, what was the median earnings of that cohort who did obtain employment? And then also, any of the individuals who were in education or training programs, did they obtain a measurable skills gain while they were in that program? There's a half a dozen different ways that is measured. Typically, it's did they progress from one semester to another, if they're a full-time student, if they're in an OJT, did they have complete 1 year of, or did they obtain the designated benchmarks set with the employer? If they're in an apprenticeship, did they progress from 1 year to the next in their apprenticeship? In WIO Youth, it's almost identical to performance measures, except for that Q2, Q4 measure. In addition to employment, the feds also allow us to include if they went from high school to post-secondary education or training program. Wagner-Pfizer Title III is a little bit simpler since they don't really have a training component. They're just looking at Q2, Q4 employment rates and the median earnings for those participants. And then good old-fashioned federal style, our success is kind of convoluted. On one individual measure, as long as we hit 50% of our goal, that is considered a success. But they look at all 5 of the goals inside of the program, and the average percent of goal obtained has to be 90% or above for the whole program to be considered a success. And those goals are negotiated with the feds every 2 years. I use negotiated loosely. They've now developed a statistical adjustment model where they use a lot of fancy math to tell us basically where they expect us to be, and we have to give them a reason why we're not going to hit that number. So that's the negotiation, but that's how our goals are set. We have a discussion with the feds on where they think we should be and where we think we should be, and we usually wind up somewhere in the middle. So for the adults program for PY23, overall, we've had a fairly successful year. For our Q2 employment rate, we hit 83.4% of our participants who obtained employment in that second quarter after they exited. Our goal that we negotiated with the feds was 80%, so our percent of goal was 104.2%. For Q4, we obtained 80.3% of our participants obtained employment, compared to our 79% goal, for a percent of goal of 101.6. Q2 earnings, you can see we surpassed about $9,000 compared to $7,100 is our goal. Credential attainment was and this is consistent across all 3 Title I programs. Credential attainment lagged the goal just a hair. well within that 50% threshold that the feds allow. We've had a lot of folks who are entering short-term programs where the credential may not be a recognized credential. It's more they've completed a course, they get a certificate of completion, and then that's it. So it doesn't count as a recognized credential even if they are completing the program. And the measurable skills gains, it was a newer measure. Some of those other 4 measures had a similar component back there in the WIA days, if any of y'all remember that. But this measurable skills gain was a new measure, so feds were a little lenient in implementing it with our goals. Those are now going to be ramped up for PY 24 and 25. But we far surpassed our measurable skills gain goals. And so if you look at that percent of goal column on the right, you take the average of those 5, that gives us our overall performance for the adult program of 114.5%, which is well above the 90% threshold that's have us at. So the adult program did very well last year. I'm sorry, I don't talk much. When I do, I get trying to throw it very easily. So dislocated workers had a very similar success overall. 81% folks obtained employment in the second quarter after exit. 81.1% obtained employment in the fourth quarter after exit. Median earnings was $11,670 for dislocated workers, well above the negotiated goal. And that equates to well almost $45,000 a year. Credential attainment, again, a little bit behind on the goal, but well within that 50% per measure threshold. And the measurable skills gains, again, well above the goal because we had a little bit of leniency there. But overall, 112.7% goal for the displaced worker programs. One other thing that isn't in this presentation, but you may remember from years past, our performance stays fairly even keel. But year over year, the feds ratchet up our goals. So we're performance is about the same, but our goals are higher. So that Q2 dislocated worker rate, that explains why it's a little bit behind on the goal. Our goal shot up 6 points last year. And for youth, Q2 employment or education, post-secondary education rate 76.7. Q4 77.6. Median earnings just under $5,000. Credential attainment 64.7. And measurable skills gains 59.1. For an overall program performance of 114.5. So all 3 Title I programs did exceptionally well last year. Wagner-Pfizer, again, no training measures, so employment-based measures 70.3%, 69.6, and 81.52 for median earnings. Just a little bit of background on our participant characteristics. In years past, we've been asked to give a little bit of a dive into who we're serving. We have Title I, about 60% female, 40% male. The majority of African American, with white and Hispanic or Latino in the second and third on the race characteristics. Age ranges for WIOA tends to be a little bit younger. Most of the folks are in the 19 to 34 range. Last year we served 13,587. I can't even see that. Yeah, 587 individuals. About 6,500 of those were carried in from the previous year. 7,000 and change were new participants for the program year. About 5,000 and change were exited. So we're bringing in about 7,600 folks for the new program year that just started in July. And I always like to have one hour task. We've had 158. But we finally found somebody in Nicholas County who wanted to be a WIOA participant. But we lost folks in Clay, Early, and Baker, it looks like. So hopefully we can pick some folks up this year. In Title III, I won't get into all of it, but very similar breakdowns. The only thing you may notice is the age skews a little older for Wagner Pfizer. See the 35 to 44 group spikes up. And then they don't have nearly as many carry-ins because Wagner Pfizer is typically a one-day type service where you're getting some assistance with a resume or quick touch services and their exit fairly quickly. And we got everybody except Tolliver County, I believe, for Wagner Pfizer. Back to Title I, just basic characteristics on individuals who are may have barriers to employment. Almost everybody was considered low income, but other than low income, our largest barrier was basic skills deficiency, unable to read or do math at the 8th grade level or higher, or above the 8th grade level. Followed by that was single parents, youth requiring additional assistance, which typically means Rosani may know the list. I know there's a dozen different things that they consider needing additional assistance, but truancy, low income, ex-offender type individuals who were youth, and then ex-offenders, disabled, pregnant parenting, down the list. Taking a look at what industries our participants are entering compared to what occupations they were trained in. You can see, for the most part, we do a pretty good job matching. Unfortunately, the way this data is obtained on our wage records, we don't get to know what kind of jobs our participants enter. We only get to know what industry they entered, but we do know what we trained them in. So this is how we're making that comparison. So our individuals who obtain employment, mostly in the healthcare industry, followed by manufacturing. This typically is temporary agencies, transportation, warehousing, accommodation, food and service, round out the top 5. We're training individuals. Truck driving is number 1, followed by majority of medical related occupations with some welding, management, and production. I'm getting the hurry up. Okay, so 2 more slides. These are the wage trends for our participants. You can see the first 3 points are before they become a participant. Blue is the individuals who did not receive training. Orange is individuals who did receive training. So you'll see before they become a WIO participant, individuals who did receive training typically get bumped up a lot higher than individuals who do not receive training. They may be coming in with a high-paying job and just want to get another job and don't want to go through training. The individuals who do see considerably higher wages, which is a good thing. It's good to know we're doing something right. And then last but not least, the ROI slide. We took all the earnings of our participants for the 4 quarters after they exit our program to get kind of an annualized total earnings of those participants. We compare that to our PY23 allocation, which is the funding we received from the Department of Labor. And you'll see earnings that exceeded our allocation by $92 million, or basically for every dollar we get from the Department of Labor, $2.56 is returned to the greater Georgia economy. Any questions on our?
I just have a question. How does the federal government make the determination on the goals?
So they will look at participant characteristics that we've observed in the past. And they've got their own kind of modeling that they do based on this set of individual characteristics. You should be obtaining about this percentage of employment. They also include the unemployment rate by industry for the state, how much of the state economy is based in what industry, and what is the unemployment rate inside those industries. And it's a big convoluted model, and I don't really agree with it a lot of times. But
So the credentialing, is it like unrealistic with the feds have been giving us?
lately, and again, the GEPRA thing, I don't even know what the acronym stands for, but basically the Congress sets goals for programs. And we kind of have to hit those benchmarks and carry our weight as Georgia is a larger state, so they depend on us to kind of hit that average more so than other states, so they hold us to a higher standard.
Any other questions?
I just want to point out that our goals continue to increase.
Thank you. And I'll say that again in the microphone. Our goals continue to increase while our allocations have plummeted.
Stephen, thank you for that presentation. Last but not least, somebody brings, gives an update on Hyundai.
Good afternoon, I know I'm standing between you and the German meeting, so I will make this as swift as possible.
Julie, can you use my?
It's so rare that someone tells me to talk louder. So this afternoon, I just had to, I'm 5'1". I'm just gonna go over a brief overview of the Hyundai project and the assistance that we at the Technical College and Office of Workforce Development are providing to Hyundai and the Hyundai suppliers. Next slide. Okay, as you know, in 2022, Governor Kemp announced that Hyundai Motor Group had selected Georgia, and more specifically Bryan County, as the location for their electric vehicle and battery manufacturing facility. The initial investment is over $6 billion in 8,500 jobs. So with the size of this particular project, next slide, please. Customized recruitment was brought in as part of the package that we were providing as an incentive for Hyundai to select Georgia. And what customized recruitment is, it's a specialized program that really focuses on recruiting, and really it offers an array of services that the employer can pick from and find out which is going to be the best for them. And so with Hyundai, what we're really been focusing on are hiring events, screening and posting jobs and recruiting qualified candidates, but also assisting with quick start assessments when needed. Next. And this is just some images from our hiring events that we've had. So next slide, please. We've had 4 hiring events since January, 3 in person and 1 virtually. The first hiring event that we had was at Savannah Tech here in Savannah, and it was Hyundai and 15 of the Hyundai suppliers. We ended up having 1,200 job seekers attend, and it was really 1,207, but 1,200 job seekers attend, and the positions range from production all the way to office and administrative positions. Next slide, please. After that initial hiring event, we decided to focus on a more localized recruitment strategy for the hiring events. And the first of the more localized events was in Bullitt County, and it was Bullitt County suppliers. And it was 3 employers in Bullitt County that are supplying Hyundai. And we had a little over 360 attendees for that particular hiring event. And again, the positions range from production all the way to office and administrative positions. Next slide, please. Our third event was a virtual event, and virtual events look a little different than in person. And for this particular event, Hyundai wanted to focus on scheduling interviews, and it was for their engineering positions. And we scheduled 19 interviews, and they made offers that day for several of the job seekers that interviewed. Next slide. And the last position, or the last hiring event that we had this year was the Chatham County supplier event, and this was an in-person event. And it was 3 employers in Chatham County that are supplying Hyundai. We had a little over 390 attendees. Next slide, please. In addition to the recruiting events that we're hosting for Hyundai, we are also heavily involved in posting their job orders, screening qualified candidates, both the active and passive job seeker. And the customized recruitment team from July 2023 to June 2024 has screened 7,125 resumes for the jobs that have been posted in our system, which is the Workforce Georgia portal, and have sent 527 job notifications to qualified candidates, both inside and outside of our system, and have scheduled 193 individuals for quick start assessments on behalf of Hyundai. And while the initial number for the jobs created was around 8,500, that number is increasing, and we are continuing our efforts to support Hyundai in their recruitment efforts. And the next few months, they are gearing up to go through their next phase, and we are in the initial steps of planning another in-person hiring event for Hyundai. So I think I did it in my 5-minute time. Any questions? Yes.
Have y'all, pulled from or have any of the applicants come from outside of Georgia that may be wanting to move here? What's the draw to maybe get to?
We have, there's been, as you can imagine, this is much better. As you can imagine, this project, just in scale and size alone, has attracted a lot of national attention. And this area, as you guys can see, you know, quality of life is good. So that's an easy sell. So there have been a lot of interest outside of Georgia, and we're working on more ways, including websites and things like that, to attract more people to move to Georgia.
So those that you did send those offers to, were any of them, were all of them just Georgians or?
No, not all of them. There were out of state and in state.
One other thing just to add to that real quickly is Bert Brantley was presenting, he's local chamber president down here, was presenting to our senior leadership academy upstairs earlier. He shared they did a trolley tour across the U.S. this summer. And so they stopped in areas like he was sharing, they stopped in Buffalo. Had a slogan, blizzard free since 1733. They are locally really doing a lot also to try to pull in, not just for the Hyundai project, but for all the other businesses here also. So it's a global effort. To your
A
question.
team for us here in the state, I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And when possible, the Savannah Bananas and the trolley were in the same city. So you, up until now, for your presentation, we've been talking about Georgians getting to work. And you talked about assessments and applications and things like that. As this presentation evolves, it'd be good to have a number of Georgians working, and it'd be really good locally. This is my local path, but it'd be really good to hear local Georgians working. That would help calm some commentary that's out there that's unnecessary. And on the good side, first production vehicle rolled off the line earlier this month. So it works.
That actually is one of my questions. The other one was, is that 8,500, is that just Hyundai or is that Hyundai and the suppliers?
Hyundai suppliers, and that number's increasing
Okay.
daily, hourly.
Any other questions? Let me thank you for that presentation.
Thank you.
So I think we've got a couple of things.
I just have a very brief comment. I just wanted to update you all. So you know our WEO funds are on a 3-year cycle. And at the end of the second year, we claw back funds from the local areas and then offer them out as additional fund requests. And then we have to monitor, make sure they spend those third-year funds. And it's a very laborious process. Kristen and team do a very good job of writing herd on the local areas who have third-year funds to make sure that they get expended. We watch all of our POs and so forth. Work very closely with our administrative services staff. I want to commend Gary Moore, our finance director, who's not in here, but oh well. Kristen, work she does, Brandon and his team, the way they work with the grant recipients, and also just our staff on the 5th floor who work with us to make sure all those funds get expended. We only returned of our PY 21 funds, $3.66 out of about 66 million.
All right, Leah, did you have one more thing?
Yes. If you can return your name tags, just leave them right there on the tables. The joint board dinner is going to take place at Vic's on the river, and we're going to meet in the lobby here at 6:45 to walk over. It's a very short walk. And I, of course, will send out the PowerPoint and other attachments at the end of the meeting, probably tomorrow. So just be on the lookout for that. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you everybody for being here. Anybody online that couldn't be here to join us, we're sorry you're not here to enjoy Savannah with us. With that, I'll entertain the motion to adjourn.
Motion to move.
Everybody.